The gunshot echoed across the plains, silencing the hushed whispers that had been following Willa Lawson for years. She stood on the porch of her lonely homestead, watching as the rattlesnake that had threatened her garden writhed its last on the dusty ground. The year was 1871, and in this corner of Wyoming Territory, the land was as unforgiving as the people who called it home. "Another one dead by your hand," came the voice from behind the fence. Mrs. Holloway, with her perpetually pinched face, stood clutching her shawl, though the June day was warm. "Seems that's all you bring, Death." Willa lowered her father's revolver, refusing to give the woman the satisfaction of a response. At 26, she'd heard it all before: the whispers, the accusations, the cruel remarks that followed her through the streets of Riverbrook like shadows. 3 babies lost, and a husband gone to the grave. "If that ain't a curse, I don't know what is," Mrs. Holloway continued, her voice carrying on the wind for anyone nearby to hear. "Good day to you, Mrs. Holloway," Willa finally said, her voice steady despite the familiar ache blooming in her chest. She turned and walked back inside, closing the door on the world that had branded her cursed. Inside her modest cabin, built by her late husband Thomas before typhoid had taken him 2 winters ago, Willa placed the revolver back on its hooks above the mantel. Her fingers lingered on the worn wood, remembering how Thomas had taught her to shoot during those first happy years of their marriage, before the babies came, before they left. 3 times her body had quickened with life, and 3 times she had held tiny, still forms against her breast, their perfect faces never to smile, their little lungs never to draw breath. The first had been a boy, born too early after she'd fallen from a startled horse. The second, a girl, had the cord wrapped around her neck. The third had simply stopped moving in her womb one winter night for reasons the doctor couldn't explain. After that, the whispers began. When Thomas fell ill months later and wasted away despite Willa's desperate nursing, the whispers became open accusations. They called her cursed, said she brought death to those she loved most. Some even crossed the street to avoid her shadow falling across them. Willa poured herself a cup of water from the pitcher and glanced at the small calendar on her wall. 2 days until she needed to head into town for supplies. 2 days until she'd have to face those stairs again. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew her attention. Visitors were rare at the Lawson homestead these days. Willa peered through the window, her hand instinctively reaching for the revolver again, but she paused when she saw the familiar wagon of Doc Patterson. "Afternoon, Willa," the elderly physician called as he climbed down from his seat. At 65, he was one of the few people in town who still treated her with kindness. "Doc," she acknowledged, stepping onto the porch. "Is everything all right?" "Got a favor to ask if you're willing," he said, removing his hat. "Got a man at my office took a bullet in his shoulder. Nothing life-threatening, but he needs somewhere quiet to recover for a spell. Town's not safe for him right now." Willa's brow furrowed. "Why would you bring a wounded outlaw to my door?" Doc Patterson chuckled, the sound warm in the afternoon air. "Not an outlaw. Name's Jake Xavier. He's a cowboy passing through who had the misfortune of witnessing something he shouldn't have. Mayor's son Caleb and his friends jumped a Cherokee trader, and Jake stepped in. Got shot for his trouble, and now Caleb's claiming Jake started it." "And you believe this cowboy?" Willa asked. "I believe what I saw with my own eyes," Doc said firmly. "But Caleb's got his pa's protection, and Jake's got a price on his head until the circuit judge arrives next month. He needs a place to lie low." Willa hesitated. Taking in a stranger was risky enough. Taking in a stranger who'd angered the most powerful family in Riverbrook, was something else entirely. I know it's asking a lot, Doc added gently, but folks don't come out this way much anymore, and you've got a way with healing that even I can appreciate. Before her reputation had soured, Willa had often assisted Doc Patterson. Her knowledge of herbal remedies passed down from her grandmother, complementing his medical training. Those days felt like another lifetime now. Bring him, she found herself saying, but just until he's well enough to ride on. Doc's smile creased his weathered face. I'll fetch him tomorrow at first light, less chance of being seen that way. After he left, Willa spent the evening preparing her small second bedroom, wondering what kind of man this Jake Xavier was to risk his life defending a stranger. She wondered, too, if he'd heard the stories about her. If Doc had warned him about the cursed widow who lost everything she loved. True to his word, Doc Patterson arrived just as dawn broke the next morning. With him was a tall man with dark hair, his right arm in a sling, his face pale but determined as he carefully dismounted from Doc's wagon. Jake Xavier, this is Willa Lawson, Doc said by way of introduction. She's agreed to help you recover. The wounded cowboy's eyes met hers, clear blue eyes that assessed her without judgment, and he offered a slight nod. Madam, I'm obliged for your kindness. Let's get you inside, she replied, noticing how he favored his right side as he walked. You can have the room at the back of the house. Once inside, Doc helped settle Jake on the bed in the spare room before examining the wound. Looking good, no signs of infection. Mrs. Lawson here knows her way around medicinal herbs. You follow her instructions, and you'll be back in the saddle before you know it. After providing detailed care instructions and leaving additional bandages and medicine, Doc Patterson departed, promising to check in when he could. An awkward silence settled between Willa and her unexpected guest. You should rest, she finally said. I'll bring some broth later. Mrs. Lawson, Jake called as she reached the door. Doc told me about your situation. I want you to know I'm grateful, and I won't bring trouble to your door if I can help it. Willa paused. What exactly did Doc tell you? That folks in town have been unkind, that you've had more than your share of sorrow. His voice was steady, direct. Not much else. Relief and something like gratitude washed over her. At least Doc hadn't shared the details of her losses or the cruel nickname the town had given her. Rest, Mr. Xavier. We can talk more when you're stronger. Over the next few days, a routine developed. Willa tended to Jake's wound, changing bandages and applying the poultice of comfrey and calendula that helped fight infection. She brought him meals and helped him walk short distances to build his strength. For his part, Jake proved to be a remarkably undemanding patient. He spent much of his time reading one of the few books Willa owned, or simply looking out the window at the rolling grassland that surrounded her homestead. On the fourth day, when his fever had fully broken, she found him sitting on the porch, despite her instructions to rest. The four walls were closing in, he explained, not sounding particularly apologetic. Fresh air does a body good. Willa couldn't argue with that. She sat in the chair beside him, allowing herself to enjoy the simple pleasure of company after so long alone. You have a fine place here, Jake observed. Good land. My husband chose it, she said, the words coming easier than expected. He had an eye for fertile soil. Jake nodded. Been working ranches since I was 15. You develop a sense for the land. Where were you headed before? She gestured to his wounded shoulder. Colorado. Got a line on a foreman position at a ranch outside Denver. He shrugged, then winced at the movement. Though that was before I made an enemy of the mayor's son. Caleb Thornton has been trouble since he was old enough to walk, Willa said, but his father's wealth protects him. Jake's expression darkened. Doesn't make what he did to that Cherokee trader right. 5 against 1, and they were fixing to hang him for allegedly stealing a watch that I'd seen Caleb drop in the dirt not 10 minutes earlier. The righteous anger in his voice surprised her. Most men passing through Riverbrook learned quickly to look the other way when the Thorntons were involved. That was brave of you, Willa said quietly. Jake shook his head. Wasn't brave, just couldn't stomach the alternative. He looked at her then, his gaze steady. Doc says you stood up to them too, in your way. Said you treated Indians and colored folks when they needed help, even when others wouldn't. Willa felt heat rise to her cheeks. I just did what was right. Town doesn't seem to appreciate that much. Town doesn't appreciate a lot of things, she responded, more sharply than intended. To her surprise, Jake chuckled. Guess we're both on Riverbrook's bad side then. Something about his easy manner, the way he spoke to her as if she were simply a person and not the town pariah, loosened something tight in Willa's chest. For the first time in ages, she found herself smiling. As the days passed, Jake grew stronger. Soon he was insisting on helping with chores, first the lighter tasks inside the house, then the outdoor work. Despite Willa's protests that he should conserve his strength, she found his company during daily tasks made them feel less like the lonely drudgery they'd become. You ever thought of keeping chickens? He asked one morning as they worked in her vegetable garden, his wounded arm now able to perform simple tasks. Good source of eggs and meat, and they're not much trouble. Thomas and I had planned to, Willa admitted, pushing away the familiar pang that came with speaking of her husband. We were going to build a coop that spring, but then Jake nodded, understanding in his eyes. I could build you one, to repay your kindness. You don't owe me anything, she insisted. Maybe not, but I'd like to all the same. The next day, he began drawing plans for a chicken coop, using materials he found in the small barn. Willa watched from the kitchen window as he worked, his movements becoming more fluid as his injury continued to heal. There was something comforting about having another person moving about the property, bringing life back to spaces that had grown too quiet. 2 weeks after Jake's arrival, Doc Patterson came to check on his progress. Looking good, he pronounced after examining the healing wound. Another couple of weeks and you'll be right as rain. Any word on the judge? Jake asked. Doc's expression grew troubled. Delayed. Some trouble down in Cheyenne. Might be another month. Jake nodded, accepting this news with the same calm he seemed to approach everything. Then I'm grateful to have a safe place to wait. After Doc left, Willa found Jake by the small creek that marked the eastern edge of her property, skipping stones across the surface with his good arm. You don't seem overly concerned about being stuck here, she observed. Jake sent another stone skipping across the water. Worse places to be stranded, he glanced at her. Unless you're eager to be rid of me. No, she said, surprising herself with how quickly the answer came. It's been nice. Having someone around. Something warm flickered in his eyes. For me too. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Jake told her about growing up in Texas, the son of a horse trainer, how he'd left home at 15 after his parents died in a fire, working his way north through one ranch after another. Never stayed anywhere too long, he admitted. Always felt like there was somewhere else I needed to be. And now Colorado, Willa said. He nodded, though something in his expression had shifted. That was the plan. In return, Willa found herself sharing stories of her own childhood in Illinois, her family's journey west when she was 16, meeting Thomas at a church social when she was 18. She spoke of their early, happy years together, carefully steering around the darker chapters that followed. But as the night deepened and the stars emerged in a brilliant canopy above them, something in the peaceful darkness made it possible to speak of things she normally kept locked away. "They call me cursed," she said quietly. "Did Doc tell you that part?" Jake's silence was answer enough. 3 babies I carried, 3 I lost. Her voice remained steady, though her hands trembled slightly in her lap. Then Thomas, after that, folks decided I was bad luck, that I bring death to those close to me. She expected him to shift uncomfortably, to make some excuse to go inside. Instead, he reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand in his. "People fear what they don't understand," he said. "It's easier to blame someone than to accept that sometimes terrible things just happen." "You don't think I'm cursed?" The question came out smaller than she'd intended. In the silver light of the rising moon, she saw the gentle shake of his head. "I think you're a woman who's endured more suffering than most could bear, yet still found the strength to show kindness to a stranger." Willa didn't realize she was crying until she felt the warm tracks of tears on her cheeks. Jake squeezed her hand gently, offering silent comfort as the night deepened around them. The next morning brought a new ease between them. The sharing of her darkest secret and his acceptance of it had shifted something fundamental. As they worked together to complete the chicken coop, their conversation flowed more freely, punctuated by moments of comfortable silence. "Town supply run tomorrow," Willa mentioned as they finished the roof. "Is there anything you need?" Jake wiped sweat from his brow. "Nothing urgent, though I should replenish the funds I've been using from your pantry." "Nonsense," she replied. "Consider it payment for the coop." He smiled, that crooked half-smile that had become familiar over the past weeks. "At least let me give you a list of things to sell for me in town. I've got some items in my saddlebags that might fetch a decent price." The next morning, Willa set out for town earlier than usual, hoping to complete her errands before the streets became busy. Jake's saddlebags contained a fine pocket watch, a silver belt buckle, and a small but exquisitely carved wooden horse that he explained had been a gift from his father. "The horse is only if you're desperate," he'd told her. "It's the one thing I've kept from before." "I won't sell it," she promised, touched by his trust. Riverbrook was already stirring when she arrived, tying her horse outside the general store. Inside, Mr. Fleming greeted her with his usual cool politeness, taking her list and gathering supplies while keeping a careful distance. "Heard you've got company out at your place," he remarked, his tone deliberately casual as he measured flour into a sack. Willa kept her expression neutral. "News travels fast. Small town." He didn't look at her as he added, "Some folks are concerned, you being a widow and all, having a strange man staying with you." "My affairs are my own concern, Mr. Fleming," she replied evenly. His eyes finally met hers. Something like genuine concern in them. "Just be careful, Mrs. Lawson. That fella tangled with the Thorntons. That kind of trouble has a way of spreading." After paying for her supplies, Willa visited the jeweler to sell Jake's pocket watch and belt buckle. Both items fetched a fair price, the craftsmanship clearly valuable. With the proceeds, she visited the mercantile and selected a new shirt and pair of trousers that looked to be Jake's size, his current clothes showing considerable wear. Her final stop was Doc Patterson's office to pick up more bandages and salve. As she was leaving, a familiar and unwelcome voice stopped her. "Well, if it isn't the widow Lawson." Mayor Thornton stood on the boardwalk, his son Caleb beside him. Both men blocked her path to her wagon. "Mayor, Caleb," she nodded, keeping her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. "Interesting development out at your place," the mayor said, his tone falsely pleasant. "Taking in strays now, are you?" "I don't know what you mean." Caleb stepped closer, his face flushed with either drink or anger. "You're harboring a wanted man, the one who assaulted me." "As I understand it, you were attempting to hang an innocent man when Mr. Xavier intervened," Willa replied, unable to keep the edge from her voice. The mayor's expression hardened. "Careful, Mrs. Lawson. Your position in this town is precarious enough without adding harboring criminals to your reputation." "Is that a threat, Mayor Thornton?" "A friendly warning. Turn Xavier over and we'll forget your involvement." Willa straightened her spine, meeting the mayor's gaze directly. "Mr. Xavier is recovering from a gunshot wound delivered by your son. When he's well enough to face the circuit judge, I'm sure he'll be happy to tell his side of the story." "You always were stubborn," the mayor said, his voice dropping. "Even after all those dead babies, you still won't learn your place." The cruelty of the words stole her breath, but before she could respond, another voice joined the conversation. "Everything all right here, Mrs. Lawson?" Sheriff Mills approached, his expression carefully neutral as he surveyed the scene. "Just having a friendly conversation with our mayor," Willa managed, her voice steadier than she felt. The sheriff looked between her and the Thorntons. "Well, I'm sure the mayor and his son have business to attend to, and I'd be happy to help you load your supplies." With a final glare, the Thorntons moved on. Sheriff Mills assisted Willa with her packages, then leaned close to speak quietly. "They've been asking questions about your visitor. Might want to keep an eye out." "Thank you, Sheriff," Willa replied, surprised by the warning from a man who had generally kept his distance from her in recent years. As she drove her wagon home, anxiety knotted in her stomach. The confrontation with the Thorntons had made it clear that Jake's presence on her property was known, and the fragile peace they'd been enjoying might soon be shattered. Jake was waiting on the porch when she arrived, immediately sensing her distress as he helped unload the supplies. "What happened?" he asked, carrying a sack of flour into the kitchen. Willa related the encounter with the Thorntons and the sheriff's warning, watching as Jake's expression darkened. "I should leave," he said firmly. "They'll come for me, and I won't have you caught in the middle." "Your shoulder's not fully healed," she argued, "and where would you go? The Thorntons have influence throughout the county." "I've managed in worse situations." "Jake." She stepped closer, surprising herself by placing a hand on his arm. "Running now would only make you look guilty. The judge will arrive eventually. We just need to be careful until then." He studied her face, conflict evident in his eyes. "Why risk this for me?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with meanings neither had voiced. Willa found herself without a ready answer that didn't reveal too much of her heart. "Because it's right," she finally said. "And because I'm tired of letting fear dictate my choices." That night, they took extra precautions, securing doors and windows before retiring. Willa lay awake, listening to the familiar sounds of her home, now accompanied by the reassuring presence of Jake in the next room. She'd grown accustomed to his presence with alarming speed, The sound of his boots on the floorboards, his deep voice, the way he hummed tunelessly while working. The thought of returning to solitude after he left for Colorado created an ache she wasn't prepared to examine too closely. Dawn brought heavy rain, turning the dirt yard to mud and keeping them indoors. Jake spent the morning teaching Willa to play poker using dried beans as chips, their laughter filling the small cabin as she accused him of cheating when he won for the third straight hand. "It's skill, not cheating," he protested, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Show me again how you shuffle," she demanded, watching his hands closely. He demonstrated, his fingers deftly manipulating the cards. "See? Nothing up my sleeves." Willa narrowed her eyes playfully. "I'm not convinced." Their faces were close across the small table, and something in the air between them shifted. Jake's smile faded slightly as his eyes moved over her face, lingering on her lips. "Willa," he said softly, her name on his lips sending a shiver through her. A sharp knock at the door shattered the moment. They froze, exchanging alarmed glances. Another knock, more insistent. Jake moved silently to retrieve his revolver from beside his bed while Willa approached the door. "Who is it?" she called, one hand on the latch. "Doc Patterson," came the familiar voice. "Let me in, Willa. It's important." She opened the door to find the doctor soaked through, worry etched on his face. "They're coming," he said without preamble. "Caleb and a group of men. They've been drinking and they're talking about frontier justice." Jake appeared beside her, his expression grim. "When?" "Tonight, most likely. I came as soon as I heard." Doc looked between them. "You need to leave, both of you. They're in a dangerous mood, and it's not just Jake they're after anymore." Fear clutched at Willa's heart. "What do you mean?" "The mayor's been stirring things up, reminding folks about your history, suggesting that harboring Jake proves you're working against the town's interests." Doc's expression was apologetic. "Some are talking about running you both out permanently." "This is my home," Willa said, her voice rising. "Everything I have is here." "And you might die defending it if you stay," Doc replied bluntly. "These men are armed and angry. The sheriff can't stand against the mayor's influence, not on this." Jake's hand came to rest on the small of Willa's back, a gesture of support that steadied her. "How much time do we have?" "A few hours at most. They were still gathering when I slipped away." After Doc left with a promise to try to delay the mob, Jake and Willa moved with urgent purpose. They packed only essentials: food, clothing, Jake's few possessions, and the small wooden box that contained Willa's most treasured keepsakes: her wedding ring, a lock of Thomas's hair, and tiny knitted booties that had never been worn. "We'll head north," Jake said as they prepared the horses. "I know people in Montana who can help us." The use of "us" wasn't lost on Willa. She should have been terrified, leaving behind everything she knew, but as she secured her saddlebags, she felt an unexpected lightness beneath the fear. Whatever waited ahead, she wouldn't face it alone. As dusk approached, they were ready to depart. Willa took a final look at the homestead that had been the setting for her greatest joys and deepest sorrows. "We can try to come back," Jake said, reading her thoughts, "once things settle." She nodded, though they both knew the likelihood was small. Once they fled, the narrative of their guilt would be cemented in the town's mind. They rode out just as the last light was fading from the sky, taking a less traveled route north through dense woodland. The rain had stopped, but the ground remained muddy, their horses' hooves making little sound as they picked their way carefully forward. They had traveled perhaps 3 miles when the sound of distant hoofbeats reached them. Jake signaled for silence, guiding them deeper into the trees. Minutes later, a group of riders passed on the main trail, torches illuminating angry faces. "That was close," Willa whispered once they'd passed. Jake nodded grimly. "Too close. We need to push on." They rode through the night, stopping only briefly to rest the horses. By dawn, they had covered considerable ground, the rolling hills of Willa's home giving way to more rugged terrain. They made camp in a sheltered ravine, taking turns keeping watch while the others slept. As Willa sat guard during her shift, watching Jake's chest rise and fall in sleep, she marveled at how completely her life had changed in the span of weeks. The curse that had shadowed her for years seemed distant now, replaced by a tentative hope she scarcely dared acknowledge. They continued north over the following days, avoiding settlements and keeping to wilderness trails. Each night around the campfire, their conversations deepened, the shared danger creating an intimacy that might have taken months to develop in ordinary circumstances. On the third night, as they sat beside a small fire high in the foothills, Jake finally asked the question that had lingered between them. "What will you do when we reach Montana?" Willa poked at the fire with a stick, watching sparks rise into the darkening sky. "I haven't thought that far ahead. You could start fresh. No one there knows your past." "No one knows I'm cursed, you mean," she said quietly. Jake's expression grew serious. "You're not cursed, Willa. You never were. 3 babies, Jake. And Thomas. Tragedy, not a curse." He moved to sit beside her, their shoulders touching. "Do you know how many women lose children? How many men die young? It happens everywhere, every day. The only curse was the cruelty of people who should have supported you through your grief." Tears pricked at her eyes. "I've carried it so long, the weight of it, the fear that loving anything would only end in loss. And yet here you are," he said softly, "risking everything to help a stranger. You're not a stranger anymore." Their eyes met in the firelight. And this time there was no interruption as Jake leaned forward, his lips meeting hers in a gentle kiss. Willa's heart thundered in her chest as she returned the kiss, her hand coming up to touch his face. When they broke apart, Jake's eyes searched hers. "I'm falling in love with you, Willa Lawson. Have been since you stood on your porch and told me to rest that first day." The words she'd never expected to hear again, words that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. "I'm afraid," she admitted, "afraid to love again, afraid of losing again." "Life offers no guarantees," he said, taking her hand. "But I'd rather spend whatever time we have loving you than spend a lifetime wondering what might have been." In that moment, beneath the vast canopy of stars, Willa made her choice. She leaned forward and kissed him again, allowing herself to believe in a future unburdened by the past. They reached Jake's friends in Montana 2 weeks later.